He saved a buried alive girl, but his past was the reason she almost died. They say, if you ride against the wind across the high plains of western Colorado, past the brittle, twisted woods and the creek bed that's nothing but stone now, you'll eventually come upon a lonely cabin tucked deep in a silent valley. No chimney smoke, no horse tracks, just a sagging fence and a man with eyes the color of winter dirt. Cole Merrick, the one who chose to vanish from the world, and maybe from himself. Folks in town used to know his name. Back then, if you had a job no one wanted to get their hands dirty with, Cole was your man, so long as the pay was right. He looked through a rifle scope like it was the only window worth seeing people through. Cold, precise, no questions asked, but once, just once, his bullet missed, not the target, his conscience. That was the day Cole disappeared from the maps drawn by men who knew how to order and destroy. These days, Cole lives alone, grows herbs for horses, keeps a few nameless goats, drinks coffee as bitter as the mountain soil. He doesn't take visitors, doesn't shake hands. Once in a while, a lost traveler might knock on his door asking for water. He just points toward the creek, then shuts the door again. Out here, folks live like the grass, not expecting to be remembered and not hoping to be watered. Most think Cole's been dead for years, not buried maybe, but hollowed out all the same. The kind of death that happens when you stop having anything left worth living for. But what even he didn't see coming was that someone had been buried, right there in the soil he thought would one day be his quiet grave. That morning, the sky wasn't kind. Fog hung across the valley like a wet scarf wrapped around your neck, damp, heavy, and cold, clear to the bone. Cole had just gotten the fire going when the old horse in the stall jerked at the lead rope, stomped twice, then went quiet. She never did that unless there were wolves nearby. But this time of year, even wolves had more hunger than fight in them. Could have been the wind, too. But Cole had lived with wind long enough to know some winds ain't right. He threw on his coat, lit his pipe, and led the mare out same as always. Didn't get far. Just before the tree line, he stopped. Something wasn't right. It wasn't a sound, exactly, more like a feeling. That old gut instinct that had saved his hide more times than he could count. At first, he thought he imagined it, but then he heard it again. Thin, fragile, like a broken breath rising from the dirt. He stood there a second, eyes scanning the edge of the pines. That stretch of land folks used to say horse thieves buried loot in. And sure enough, something was off. A mound of fresh earth, damp. Grass hadn't even started to grow. No one had buried anything here in over 10 years, except maybe that raccoon Cole accidentally snared last winter. He walked over, knelt down, laid his hand on the soil. It wasn't warm, but it was softer than it should be. Too soft, hadn't settled yet. And then he heard it, clear this time, a breath, faint but human and alive. He didn't wait another second, dropped his pipe, threw his hat aside, and started digging. Bare hands, no shovel, no tools, just fingers and busted nails tearing through cold, muddy earth. It smelled like rust and death, and every handful he tossed away brought with it one gnawing truth. If he was too slow, it'd be too late. Then his fingers hit something soft and cold, not roots, not cloth, a hand, small, bloodied, trembling. He dug faster, a forearm, then a lock of dark hair matted to her scalp. She was still breathing, barely, but breathing. Cole lifted the near lifeless body from that shallow grave like he was holding a ghost. She didn't weigh much, but it felt like he was carrying the world's shame in his arms, a thing the world had tried to bury, and almost succeeded. He didn't say a word, just turned and started walking back to the cabin. But in his head, one thought rose louder than any wind. Someone tried to bury her, and God help us, they damn near did. The girl in Cole's arms felt no heavier than a broken reed, half sunk in river mud, light as air, yet heavy with sorrow. Her skin was cold like a winter fog, her heartbeat so faint he had to stop for a second, just to be sure it was still there. Eyes swollen shut, black and blue, lips cracked and bleeding. One shoulder sagged like it didn't belong to her body anymore, probably broken. Cole wasn't a doctor, but he'd seen enough bodies to know she was alive and hanging on by something thinner than a thread. He kicked open the cabin door with his shoulder, laid her down on the small bed near the stove, a bed that usually held nothing but old blankets and sacks of dry corn. Cole fetched warm water, dipped a rag, and started wiping the dirt from her face. Slow, gentle, no rush, no shaking hands. A man who once patched up bullet wounds in the middle of a battlefield sure as hell could clean up a woman who'd been buried alive. Each time he rinsed the cloth, the water darkened, from earth brown to a bruised red. Her face slowly emerged from beneath the grime, younger than he expected, but not a single part of it untouched. And when he saw her like that, something twisted sharp inside his chest, like someone had scraped across an old scar that never quite healed. He didn't ask her name. She didn't speak, just flinched a little when the cloth touched her skin, then closed her eyes again. Sometimes her lips moved, but not a sound came. That struck Cole as strange. Folks near death usually called out to someone. A mama, a sweetheart, a name from the past. But this girl? It was like there wasn't anyone left for her to call. When the fire in the stove had turned steady and warm, and she was wrapped in 2 thick quilts, Cole stood up and walked over to the coat rack where the old telegraph machine sat, still wired to the Redwater Clinic. He raised his hand to type, "Emergency, need doctor, woman gravely injured." But his fingers stopped, hovering over the brass keys. Sending the message would have been the right thing to do, what anyone would have done. But something pulled at him, hard, that same gut pull he used to feel in the mercenary days, right before a calm patch of land turned into a kill zone. It came rushing back, as clear as the firelight dancing on the cabin walls. He didn't know why, but he knew one thing for damn sure. If he called for help, someone would come. And that someone wouldn't just be carrying a doctor's bag. Cole lowered his hand, turned off the transmitter, and walked back to the bed. He wasn't a good man, wasn't a hero. But something in that bruised, swollen face made it damn near impossible to walk away. Maybe it was compassion. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was both. The girl didn't wake the whole afternoon, just lay there, her breaths shallow, barely stirring the quilt as the fire in the stove crackled and hissed. Cole sat nearby, not doing much, just adding more tea leaves now and then, glancing over to make sure her chest still moved. Outside, the sky hung heavy and gray. The wind howled around the roof, like even the weather knew something wasn't right inside that old wooden cabin. It wasn't until the firelight deepened into a heavy orange that she started to stir. First, her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Then her brow creased, like the light pained her eyes. Slowly, her lids opened, dull from exhaustion, yet somehow still holding on to a spark. She looked around, dazed, then curled in on herself like a wounded animal coming to in a cage. "You're safe now," Cole said softly, voice barely louder than the fire. She didn't answer, just stared at him, not with trust, but the kind of stare folks give when they're trying to figure out if you're the one who buried them alive. It took a long moment before she finally spoke, voice raw, dragging like boots across dry gravel. "My name is Nora Bell." She paused, like saying the name out loud might draw someone who'd been hunting her. Cole gave a small nod, didn't ask questions, didn't need to. But Nora kept talking anyway, words spilling out like water behind a broken dam. "I used to wait tables at the Red Barrel, down in Redwater." Cole knew the place, rowdy joint, full of bootleg whiskey and shady deals, the kind of place the sheriff didn't bother with, even when the gunshots came loud and clear. "I wasn't looking to get into trouble," Nora said, eyes fixed on the fire. "I just saw it. That's all. A man wore a federal badge. They dragged him out back. I thought maybe they were arresting someone, but no." She drew in a breath that caught in her throat halfway. Her fingers clutched the edge of the blanket like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "They killed him, right there. Dumped his body in the dry well behind the kitchen. The mayor's men, the police chief, he was there too, laughing. Cole said nothing, just sat there, face still as damp wood, watching her. I tried to tell someone, not the law, I ain't stupid, a reporter, Mr. Kearns. He once told me, this town's got rot that needs daylight. Nora gave a bitter chuckle, dry as desert wind. I didn't even make it to him. They caught me, bag over my head, beat me, then buried me. That last word fell like a stone down a deep well. And then, silence. Cole didn't speak, but his eyes had changed. For the first time in years, they were sharp, like they used to be, back when he lived by the gun. There were things he had turned his back on. But this wasn't one of them. Not when a girl could still breathe, just enough to tell the truth a whole town tried to bury. Cole sat there, saying nothing. His eyes fixed on the flames dancing inside the stove, like they were replaying some old memory only he could see. What Nora just told him, it wasn't news. It was a wound torn open. Her words landed like an axe in the center of his mind, splitting open a past he'd spent years trying to bury under the dust and silence of this solitary life. He knew those men too damn well. Sheriff Holt, all slick smiles and a whip hanging from his belt, once paid Cole to quietly handle a deserter. And Mayor Greeley, the man who ran the town's money, cheated at cards better than any backroom gambler Cole had met. Cole used to work for them both, got paid handsomely to keep quiet and to pull the trigger at just the right time. Back then, he didn't ask questions. A man paid, he delivered. That was the deal. No strings, no need to remember names or faces of the folks who ended up on the ground. But then, just once, he saw a child's eyes, a little boy crying over his father's body, shot clean through the chest. That one look did something to Cole, started making sleep harder to come by. It wasn't ghosts that haunted him, it was himself. He walked away from Redwater after that, came up here to the edge of nowhere, rebuilt his father's old shack on a hillside no one wanted, grew his own herbs, chopped his own wood, did things that didn't involve crosshairs or death. He figured if he lived quiet long enough, maybe it'd wash some of the blood off. But now, the truth spilling out of Nora's cracked lips was like someone lighting a match over dry powder. Those bastards were still out there, still alive, still killing. And this time, they buried a girl alive just because she saw too much. Nothing's changed. Only difference is Cole had turned his back too long. He looked over at Nora, still curled under the blanket, eyes shut tight, lashes fluttering ever so slightly. She didn't survive out of luck. No, someone, maybe God, maybe fate, wanted her found. Maybe Cole was the one meant to find her. He got up and walked over to the old cupboard by the wall, the one with the locked wooden chest inside. That's where he kept the gun. He didn't open it, just placed his hand on the lid, like greeting an old friend he swore he'd never speak to again. He wasn't a blood man anymore. But this wasn't about blood. Not now. If justice was going to mean anything again, for her, for this town, he couldn't just sit there watching the fire burn, not with a gun, not with violence, but with a different kind of justice. The kind Cole Merrick thought he'd lost a long damn time ago. Nora came to fully by noon the next day. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, mist clinging wet across the porch rail. Inside the cabin, the air carried the scent of simmering tea and salve for broken skin. She sat up slow, like someone clawing their way back from the grave, which, in truth, she was. When Cole handed her the cup of tea, she didn't thank him, didn't hesitate either. She looked him straight in the eyes and said, voice hoarse but steady, I want to kill every last one of them. Cole didn't flinch. He'd seen that look before, years ago, in the eyes of a man who'd lost his daughter to a patrol gone reckless. Back then, it didn't stir anything in him, but now it chilled him right down to the bone. Killing's easy, he said, slow and even. I know how. I still remember exactly where their hearts sit inside their chests. He blew gently over his cup of coffee, steam curling like smoke from a chimney. then set it down. His voice dropped, quiet as crackling embers. But once they're dead, what are you going to be then? In this town's eyes, you'll be just another mad woman crawling out of a grave for revenge. And me? He gave a half shrug. They'll call me what they always did, a hired gun. Nora's hands clenched the blanket so hard her knuckles turned white. But the rage in her didn't flare anymore. It sank in like rain soaking into dry, cracked earth. She said nothing more, just stared into the stove fire, heavy and quiet. Cole stood up and crossed the room to an old map nailed to the back wall, a faded outline of Redwater, districts, roads, post office, the print shop, and the Red Barrel Saloon where Nora once worked. He pointed at the lower left corner. Here, he said, there's a guy named Reuben Marks. Used to be a newspaper man. Now just prints calendars and wedding invitations. But he still keeps a few underground wires open. If we bring him something solid, something that stinks, he can help us make noise. Nora looked at Cole, unsure whether to believe in that or not. Proof? She asked, guarded. Cole nodded. You remember exactly where they dumped that inspector's body? She swallowed, voice dry. Yes, the dry well behind the saloon. Then that's where we start, Cole said. But quiet. No one can know you're alive. The more ghost you are, the more they'll fear you. Nora paused, then nodded. Not out of fire or fury, but with the calm of someone who'd learned the hard way. To bring truth back from the dead, you need more than guts. You need a clear head. Cole walked back to the stove and tossed in another log. His voice was low, but steady as a hammer strike. I won't kill this time, but I'll fight, and we're damn sure not going to be the only ones who know this ever happened. Nora came to fully by noon the next day. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, mist clinging wet across the porch rail. Inside the cabin, the air carried the scent of simmering tea and salve for broken skin. She sat up slow, like someone clawing their way back from the grave, which, in truth, she was. When Cole handed her the cup of tea, she didn't thank him, didn't hesitate either. She looked him straight in the eyes and said, voice hoarse but steady, I want to kill every last one of them. Cole didn't flinch. He'd seen that look before, years ago, in the eyes of a man who'd lost his daughter to a patrol gone reckless. Back then, it didn't stir anything in him, but now it chilled him right down to the bone. Killing's easy, he said, slow and even. I know how. I still remember exactly where their hearts sit inside their chests. He blew gently over his cup of coffee, steam curling like smoke from a chimney, then set it down. His voice dropped, quiet as crackling embers. But once they're dead, what are you going to be then? In this town's eyes, you'll be just another mad woman crawling out of a grave for revenge. And me? He gave a half shrug. They'll call me what they always did, a hired gun. Nora's hands clenched the blanket so hard her knuckles turned white. But the rage in her didn't flare anymore. It sank in like rain soaking into dry, cracked earth. She said nothing more, just stared into the stove fire, heavy and quiet. Cole stood up and crossed the room to an old map nailed to the back wall, a faded outline of Redwater, districts, roads, post office, the print shop, and the Red Barrel Saloon where Nora once worked. He pointed at the lower left corner. Here, he said, there's a guy named Reuben Marks. Used to be a newspaper man. Now just prints calendars and wedding invitations, but he still keeps a few underground wires open. If we bring him something solid, something that stinks, he can help us make noise. Nora looked at Cole, unsure whether to believe in that or not. Proof? She asked, guarded. Cole nodded. You remember exactly where they dumped that inspector's body? She swallowed, voice dry. Yes, the dry well behind the saloon. Then that's where we start, Cole said. But quiet. No one can know you're alive. The more ghost you are, the more they'll fear you. Nora paused, then nodded. Not out of fire or fury, but with the calm of someone who'd learned the hard way. To bring truth back from the dead, you need more than guts. You need a clear head. Cole walked back to the stove and tossed in another log. His voice was low, but steady as a hammer strike. I won't kill this time, but I'll fight, and we're damn sure not going to be the only ones who know this ever happened. That night, the sky was overcast, the moon dull as if smeared with ash. Wind hissed through the dry pine trees along the mountainside. Sounded like someone whistling through a graveyard full of orphans. Cole latched the horse stall door, then turned to Nora. She was already dressed in men's clothes, hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, eyes set with a look that didn't belong to someone who'd been buried alive, but to someone who survived and wasn't done fighting for the truth. They didn't take the main road. Cole led her through a back trail behind the ridge, past a dry creek bed and an old gravel clearing where a horse relay station once stood. As they neared the edge of Redwater, they stopped at an abandoned lean-to near the freight depot, the same spot Cole used to trap wild dogs years ago. From there they could see the Red Barrel Saloon, glowing weakly under yellow oil lamps, like a wound that never healed. "You sure it's still there?" Cole asked quietly. Nora nodded. "The red notebook. I hid it under a floor plank near the bar. I wrote it all down. Names, dates, even what the mayor said to the sheriff. I was scared I'd forget, so I wrote." They waited until the lights dimmed, and the only sounds left were the faint clinks of dishes in the back. Then they slipped in through the rear door. Inside, the place still stank of stale whiskey and cheap cigar smoke. Nora dropped to her knees, reaching under the warped wood. A few tense seconds passed before her hand emerged, trembling, holding a small notebook. The edges curled, the cover stained, but it was there. The one thing that could drag a whole rotten system into daylight. Instead of heading back to the mountains, they turned onto Claiborne Street. At the far end stood an old print shop with a leaning sign that read, Marks and Sons Printing. Inside, an elderly man with a silver beard was labeling wedding cards, the lamplight glinting off his thick glasses. "Reuben," Cole called gently. The man looked up, squinted, then widened his eyes. "Lord Almighty. Cole Merrick? Thought you were dust in the wind by now." "Not yet," Cole replied, "but I've got something for you, and it's urgent." He placed the notebook on the counter. "This is the testimony of a woman who was buried alive, just for seeing the truth." Reuben flipped through a few pages. His face shifted from curiosity to stunned silence. "If this is real," he muttered, "Redwater's about to blow sky high." Nora spoke up, voice solid as a hammer strike. "I'm the one who wrote it. I remember every damn detail. I've got the bruises. I've still got dirt from the grave in my hair. What more do you need?" Reuben sat still for a long moment. Then he sighed, pulled open a drawer, and grabbed an old ink tube. He fitted it into a hand press machine that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Civil War. "I used to think I was too old. That, printing wedding menus, was all the courage I had left." He looked at Cole, then at Nora. "But maybe Redwater needs a reminder." And the press began to roll, slow, steady, relentless, like a prayer whispered in ink and paper. Reuben's printing press was old, real old, but each turn of its wheels breathed out a truth Redwater had been trying to bury for years. The black ink smudged across yellowed paper, and the smell of fresh prints mixing with aged oil made for a thick, heady scent that Cole once called the smell of revelation. Nora sat nearby, silently watching each sheet slide out. Her eyes weren't filled with fear anymore. They held something else now. A waiting. Like someone standing on a distant hill, watching a storm roll in and choosing, this time, not to run. That very night, they bundled a portion of the printed pages, tied them tight with twine, and handed them off to a wiry boy named Micah, the same kid who'd once herded cattle for Cole the summer before. Nobody questioned a boy riding out of town at dawn. He took the bundle straight to Denver, delivered it to two places, the office of the federal marshal and the newsroom of the Mountain Sentinel, a paper the mayor once threatened to bankrupt just for whispering about corruption. Within 2 days, Redwater wasn't Redwater anymore. At sunrise, before the sky even cleared, 6 tall horses clopped into the middle of Main Street. Federal badges gleamed beneath the early light. Behind them came an iron-reinforced wagon, not for goods, but for people with crooked spines and stained hearts. The townsfolk poured out, confusion painted on their faces like children sensing a storm, but seeing no clouds. But the ones who had drank at Red Barrel, who'd watched Sheriff Holt skip tabs, or heard whispers of folks who vanished without goodbyes, they knew. Something rotten was about to be dug up. By noon, 3 men were cuffed and marched straight through the street. Ray Doyle, the one who'd buried Nora alive, Sheriff Holt, and lastly, Mayor Greeley, dragged out of a council meeting like a fat goose yanked from a nap. No one in town said a word. They just watched. Silent. As if everyone had always known this was coming, but no one had dared to be the first to speak it aloud. News spread like wildfire on a dry prairie. Reporters from Denver descended. A front-page headline screamed, "Buried alive, young woman exposes Redwater's power machine." Copies were sold at every rail stop. They called her the girl who rose from the grave. Nora didn't like the title much, but she didn't argue. For the first time in her life, silence wasn't a death sentence. Cole didn't go into town that day. He stayed on his porch, sipping lukewarm coffee, eyes scanning the still ridgeline like nothing had ever happened. But he knew, deep down, something had. Something that mattered. This time, the truth didn't get buried. That evening, the air stood still. The sun hadn't fully set yet, but its light was already fading, painting the grassland behind Cole's house in a deep, golden hue. Nora was out on the porch, hanging blankets to dry. Her hands still bore scrapes and bruises, but her eyes were brighter now. Like every day she survived pulled her another inch out of the grave. Cole sat nearby, carving a block of wood into a new handle for his old knife, pipe clenched in his teeth but unlit. Everything looked peaceful, but peace, out here in the West, was never a guarantee. Then came the sound of hooves, not fast, not hurried, steady, measured, like a statement more than a warning. Cole looked up. He knew that horse wasn't carrying mail, wasn't bringing supplies either. Nora heard it too. Her hand paused on the clothesline. She didn't look at Cole. She didn't need to. They both knew who it was. His name was Ray Doyle, the mayor's most loyal enforcer, the one who'd shoveled dirt onto Nora's face that stormy night. Of all the men who'd been arrested, he was the one that slipped through, and now he was back, to end things, maybe in blood. He didn't come all the way in, pulled up at the fence line, boots quiet, but his hand never left his belt. The setting sun sliced across the brim of his hat, shadowing most of his face, leaving just a twisted little grin exposed. "Well now, Cole," he sneered, "heard you made yourself a hero." Cole didn't rise, just slowly set the wood aside, flicking his hand to tell Nora to step back. But she didn't. She stepped forward instead, holding a small pistol. The steel caught the dying light and flashed like lightning. Ray froze, just for a breath, but enough to see it. The real fear wasn't the gun. It was that she was still alive. "Almost dying don't mean forgetting," Nora said, voice low, steady. "I remember every punch, every handful of dirt you packed on my face." He chuckled, hand still hovering near his holster. "Then shoot me, girl. Get it over with." Nora raised the gun. Her eyes didn't blink. The air froze with her. Cole stood up slowly, didn't stop her, didn't urge her. It was her choice to make. Then she lowered the gun. Her hand trembled just slightly, but her gaze didn't waver. "I'm not like you," she said. "I don't need to kill to win. I just need you to be seen." At that very moment, 2 riders emerged from the pine trees behind the house, Marshal Williams and a federal agent. They'd been waiting. Ray had no more room to run. He was cuffed right there at the fence, a living witness, the final nail in the coffin of a rotten machine. Nora watched the wagon carry him off. Then she let out a breath. Not relief, but like dropping a stone that had lived in her chest too long. She didn't have to kill anyone. She just needed the chance to live without fear. 1 week after Ray Doyle's arrest, Redwater held its first trial where no one had to pretend to look away. It took place outdoors, in the town square, because nobody dared close the doors like they used to. Chairs were arranged in a rough circle. Folks crowded quietly behind them. No shouting, no cheering, just the wind brushing over rooftops that had, for years, sheltered more secrets than they'd ever admit. Nora sat up front, wearing a plain cloth blouse and a pale gray headscarf. No makeup, no white dress like the kind people imagine on some triumphant victim. But her eyes were solid as stone, and when she spoke, there were no tears, only truth, sharp and clean like a blade. Mayor Greeley, Sheriff Holt, and Ray Doyle all sat with their heads down, not out of guilt, but because there was nowhere left to hide. The evidence had been printed and hung on bakery walls, the blacksmith shop, the post office. Everyone had read it. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was their story now, the town's story. When the trial ended, no one clapped. They just stood, slowly. A few men removed their hats. One woman choked back tears. The seamstress laid a hand gently on Nora's shoulder and said nothing. That was how Redwater bowed, not with noise but with silence and a look in the eye. Cole wasn't there. He stood on the hill behind the church, where he could see the square from above, hat in hand, eyes on the shape of Nora in the crowd. He didn't walk down, didn't wait for anyone to call his name. To him, justice didn't need a signature carved into it. It only needed to exist. They say he smiled that day, not a wide smile, just a faint crease in the corner of his mouth. But real, like something had ended inside him, not with a bullet, but with something he thought he'd lost long ago. Faith. That night, Nora came home late. She stepped onto the porch and sat beside Cole without a word, just poured him a cup of black coffee. They sat that way, shoulder to shoulder, listening to the wind brushing the rafters, the distant hoot of an owl, the quiet thrum of two hearts finally beating, like a lake after a storm. The girl who was buried alive had finally seen the light, and the man who had lived like a ghost could finally see the sky in his own eyes again. Neither of them believed every wound had healed, but some things don't need to fully heal to be called healed enough. People often think justice comes with gunfire on a dusty street, or the sound of shackles clinking behind the guilty. But truth is, justice rarely makes noise. It comes in quiet ways, like the way Nora walked through the crowd without bowing her head, or the way Cole sat by the fire, no longer afraid of the light. Since that day, Redwater was no longer a silent town. People started asking more questions, not just about crops or salt prices, but the harder ones. How long have I been silent? Did I really not see, or did I just not want to? Nora didn't stay in town. She moved out to Cole's ranch, not because she needed shelter, but because that's where she came back to life. There was no big wedding, no name changes, no loud promises, just two people who had died inside in their own way, learning to live again, together, from the start. Cole stayed the same in most ways. Still drank black coffee, still didn't talk much. But now someone always filled his cup without needing to be asked. He didn't tell stories from the past anymore. Not because he forgot, but because the past no longer weighed him down. Some scars shouldn't fade. They remind us that the cost of silence is always higher than the cost of truth. If that last story touched something inside you, then let the next one take you even deeper, to an ending you won't forget anytime soon. Click the video on the screen.